Good morning and welcome to our webinar with Gradient Institute, Implementing Responsible AI in Business. My name is Rita Arrigo and I'll be welcoming you to this webinar. Firstly, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land that I'm presenting from today. And I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Today, we're going to be sharing with you implementing responsible AI in business in this webinar, delivered jointly with Gradient Institute. If you're here, you would have registered, so welcome. We also will be issuing out a survey as your feedback is so very important to us. So we really want to know what you think of the event. So please respond to the survey and we will be taking your questions. And here we go. So a little bit about the agenda. We're going to be unpacking the recently launched Implementing AI Ethics Principles report. You can actually read the report by going to the CSIRO National AI Centre website, and you'll notice that I've posted this infographic in there as it goes through implementing the range of Australia's AI ethics principles. But today we're going to focus on a selection of effective practices, including impact elicitation, data curation, fairness measures, and systems and assessment. So you'll find some really, really useful data through this webinar. I'd like to introduce you to our key speakers. You will hear from Dr. Simon Callaghan. He has 15 years experience in developing and applying machine learning techniques to help solve challenging problems across a diverse set of domains, including robotics, urban planning, and geophysics. He has a degree in electrical engineering and a PhD in computer science, and at Gradient, Simon now focuses on turning these ethical principles into realisable practices that help align the behaviour of an organisational system with their intended purpose. He's overseen the assessment and optimisation of in-production AI systems across the financial, retail and recruitment sectors. He's also authored reports with the Australian Human Rights Commission on addressing algorithmic bias and the Minderoo Foundation on governance advice for de-risking automated decisions. We really look forward to hearing from Simon. Simon's also joined by not Dr. Lachlan Camlin, I apologise, but by Dr. Alistair Reid. Alistair has a diverse experience developing AI solutions for applications such as geophysical demographic modelling, education. He holds qualifications in physics and is passionate about physics, computer science, aeronautical engineering and machine learning. As AI systems are increasingly used to make consequential decisions to impact people's lives, Alistair is passionate about ensuring they are developed and deployed responsibly. At Gradient Institute, Alistair has contributed to influential publications such as the Australian Human Rights Commission report. He's been one of the co-authors of Implementing Australia's AI Ethics Principles, and today he will speak about engaging international about the actual report. He has engaged international organisations such as banking, sales and recruitment sectors to audit high-risk AI systems and develop AI governance frameworks and policies. So just to introduce, we know that there is this accelerating wave of AI that presents concerns around trust, privacy, security and data. But we do see AI's potential to alleviate many challenges from the health to the environment and societal innovation. However, with all this complexity of everything generating data, we have this moment in time to build our muscle around responsible AI. So AI is our co-pilot in the complex world. I know that a lot of you may have read about CSIRO's global megatrends around adapting to climate change, leaner, cleaner, greener, the escalating health imperative, and these are all really complex things that we have to deal with, and we see as AI as being able to help us work through these complexities. And AI does mean more benefits. We have seen already that it creates better customer experiences, improved decision making, helps us innovate with our products and services, and achieve cost savings as well as increase the operational efficiency and productivity. But how do we do that at the same time as building our responsible AI advantage? So the National AI Centre, we're working across industry to increase adoption of responsible AI and grow the responsible AI industry in Australia. And we're joined by our foundation partners, Google and CEDA. We're working across 3 key areas around getting started, the ecosystem discoverability portal, where you can meet a range of AI partners that you can work with, as well as the responsible AI network, which is uplifting our ability to implement responsible AI. So a little bit about responsible AI, and you'll hear a lot more later on from Simon and Alistair, but it is about implementing Australia's AI ethics principles, which were established in 2019. And we're also finding that at the moment, organisations are not cultivating trustworthy AI. And a lot of this work that we're doing is around making it easier to figure out how to do that and democratise that, so that we are improving the way we're implementing Australia's responsible AI principles. So the Responsible AI Network works across law, standards, design, leadership principles, technology and governance. And Gradient Institute is a key knowledge partner in that. We already have a range of different webinars available that you can listen to later on and review them. But you'll also be able to hear this recording as well. And stay tuned for AI Month. And now I'm going to hand over to Alistair and to Simon to take us on the journey around implementing responsible AI in business. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. Thanks. I'll share here. So just a sec. Okay, is that coming through okay? Can you see that, Rita? Yeah, okay, all good.
Yes, all good.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for that intro. Before I jump in, I'll just give a quick overview of Gradient. So we are an independent, not-for-profit research institute, and we focus on a bunch of things, but we are a technical organization with most of the staff having like a long background in machine learning research and development. So our focus primarily is on research into safe and responsible AI systems. We also give guidance on AI system design to the likes of businesses, government, and not-for-profits. That guidance can take many forms, such as a publication like the one we're going to talk about today. We've also published related reports with the Australian Human Rights Commission on algorithmic bias, as well as a report with the Minderoo Foundation on de-risking AI in automated decision systems. Another big focus for us is education and on training people who are responsible for AI systems. We also carry out audits, technical audits of AI systems themselves, as well as the governance frameworks within where they sit. And we've done audits for some in production AI systems for some of the country's leading organizations in the financial services, in recruitment, and in telco as well. And then we also offer policy advice to government at both a state and federal level. So Gradient sits on the New South Wales Government AI Review Committee, and we've also contributed to the federal government's ethical AI framework. So we're going to talk, it's kind of the foundation for this report, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. Okay, so just in terms of today's talk, I'll spend just a couple of slides kind of just setting out the context around the report before outlining our approach to writing the document. And then I'll very seamlessly pass over to Al at some point, who's sitting here beside me, and he'll go through some of the selected practices that we've identified in a lot more detail, and hopefully convince you to start adopting them in your business from today. Okay, so I'm just getting a small bit of feedback there, Rita, maybe possibly on the on your side. Yeah, so I'm sure we're all aware of kind of the growing pervasiveness of AI in our lives. So today, we use AI to allocate, important resources as well as kind of consequential opportunities, influencing how we communicate with one another. AI decides what information we do or don't see, kind of shapes our opinions as well as our core values, right? But as the kind of influence of AI within our lives grows, like so too do the risks that are associated with AI that can lead to potential harms. And you might ask, so where do these harms come from? Well, AI systems work by kind of leveraging patterns that they identify in the training data to make predictions. And as a consequence of this, any issues with the training data, like around data quality or whether the data might contain undesirable biases or stereotypes, these can be incorporated into the decisions that the AI system makes. For example, on the top left of the screen there, picked out, this is GPT-3, which kind of underpins ChatGPT, and I've asked it to kind of predict the next word. Given a prompt, the CEO's name was, and you can see what its kind of next most likely words are going to be. You can see it reckons John, Michael, Mr. are more likely, far more likely than any kind of female name or Mrs., for example. And if we're going to start using these systems to make more and more decisions about who gets opportunities such as like a job interview and who doesn't, then these sort of biases kind of translate to considerable harms. Another kind of key difference when we use AI to make decisions rather than humans is that AI, they learn from optimizing mathematical objectives, right? Such as maximizing accuracy. And these objectives can fail to capture some very important attributes that we just take for granted in humans, right? Things like common sense or an understanding as to what's morally right or wrong. Right? And the result of this is that the systems can kind of mindlessly act in a way, to try to achieve a simplified goal, often at the detriment of other very important things that matter. So we see algorithms that kind of offer you like a personalized news feed in an attempt to maximize the amount of time you spend on a website or an app, comes at the cost of creating harmful echo chambers or polarizing people's viewpoints. Similarly, AI systems might kind of seek to maximize accuracy across a general population. And this can sometimes be at the expense of kind of underrepresented minorities in the group who don't quite fit the general trend of the training data. So you can see that as we delegate more and more decisions to AI, groups that are already disadvantaged can be subject to even greater harms. And then as well, of course, as these systems become more complex, involving contributions from multiple disciplines, it's probably not surprising that the kind of lines of accountability can become quite blurred. So we've kind of frequently observed individuals making design decisions who are kind of several steps removed from seeing the impact of those decisions on the end user. And this can kind of quickly lead to a lot of unintended consequences. Okay, so with all those risks in mind, and unfortunately, that's just a few of them, it's important to kind of consider what are the implications for your organization. So certainly AI systems without adequate control can give rise to unintended consequences, right? And they can expose your organization to harm as well as users. So organizations who are using AI need to consider things like the legal obligation, whether the system is going to comply with upcoming standards and regulations, the impact to your organization's reputation if any of these risks are realized, and also whether the kind of decisions being made by the AI system adhere to your organization's own ethics and values. And I should point out that this is true regardless of whether you develop the system yourselves or whether you are procuring the system from elsewhere. At the end of the day, it's your organization making the decision to deploy the system, so it's your organization that's accountable for its actions. So responsible AI is all about taking steps to harness the benefits of AI while minimizing any of the unintended consequences. Right, so kind of as a first step to helping organizations mitigate some of these risks, the Australian federal government released Australia's AI ethics framework back in, I think it was November 2019. And this is like a voluntary framework that's kind of centered around 8 kind of key principles that kind of state how an AI system should act, or principles that the AI system should adhere to. So it includes kind of statements like AI systems should benefit individuals, society, and the environment. Things like AI systems should respect human rights, diversity, and the autonomy of humans. Fairness looks at things around inclusion and stating that AI systems shouldn't discriminate against any individuals or groups. Importantly, there's things around privacy, respecting someone's privacy, data privacy, and data security. Reliability looks at whether the AI system is operating in accordance with its intended purpose. Contestability, if you were kind of subject to a decision, a consequential decision that an AI system has made, you should have a channel to contest that decision and challenge it. Transparency then is all about kind of disclosure to individuals when they're interacting with an AI or when an AI is making a decision about them. And lastly, accountability looks at having people who are clearly identifiable when they're responsible for parts of the AI within the lifecycle, and also ensuring that there's human oversight over the system once it's deployed. So these principles are a great start, we think, but based on kind of the engagement that we've had with a lot of people in industry, we get people kind of saying things along the lines of like, we're very happy with these principles and we agree with them, but how do we actually go about implementing these in practice? And we felt at Gradient that there's a lack of actionable steps out there that help organizations implement these effectively. And that's kind of what inspired this report. So the report itself, we've kind of framed it around these principles. The purpose is to support businesses putting AI ethics into practice. And what we've done is for each principle, we've kind of curated a selection of practices that we believe are effective in promoting that principle within the AI system. So we'll talk a bit more about them in a second, but also for each practice as well, we point to a series of resources or guidelines that kind of help you implement that practice. We also at some points as well point to gaps that we've noticed where we feel like there isn't actually sufficient resources out there to help organizations fulfill this practice, and something that could be addressed maybe in the future. I just want to point out as well that a goal of writing this report is to make the document that's very approachable to a general audience, right? So to do this, we have to make some trade-offs. And I should stress that this isn't an exhaustive list of every responsible AI practice that we can think of that kind of promotes certain principles, right? But rather the report is about pragmatic advice that's accessible to a broad community of people. Okay, and then what we've done for each practice is kind of called out who we think this practice is most applicable to. And we've kind of grouped these kind of people into 3 groups. So there's the senior leaders in the organization who are kind of responsible, obviously, for kind of setting the tone of the organization and the direction and the governance and strategy. There's also this idea of a system owner. These are staff who are accountable for making business judgments at kind of a system level for the system and are kind of accountable for the system's actions. And then there's the development team. They could kind of consist of maybe data scientists, software engineers, UX designers as well. So we acknowledge that there are a lot more people in the design team as well involved in creating an AI system, but we've chosen to focus on these kind of 3 pivotal roles. So just a very zoomed out overview of the report. You can kind of see we've broken into these 8 practices here, 8 principles, and each principle we've kind of assigned a series of practices that promote it. Today's talk, we're going to just focus, obviously we can't cover everything. We've just picked out 4 practices that we're just going to focus on and explain in more detail. So I'll hand you over to Al now, who will talk us through the first one, which is about human, societal, and environmental well-being.
Thanks, Simon. So the first practice we'll spotlight relates to this human, societal, and environmental well-being principle, which states that through their life cycle, AI systems should benefit individuals, society, and the environment. Now, in a business setting, this doesn't mean that the primary purpose of your system has to be to make the world a better place, but rather that you need to approach with the understanding that a system can have unintended negative impacts, and those negative impacts need to be accounted for. So the corresponding practices we chose in the report are eliciting potential impacts to understand who is impacted and how they are impacted, assessing the system against these impacts, and balancing ethical and business objectives in a responsible manner. So before you can control negative impacts, you need to identify them. So the practice we'll spotlight here is eliciting impacts. It's all too easy to overlook negative impacts from the point of view of the system owner specifying the system or the developers building the system, simply because you're focused on building the system in front of you. So to address this risk, we undertake structured activities to explore who is impacted and investigate how the system impacts them. The benefit this brings is that many harmful impacts can actually be measured and monitored, and being aware of these impacts informs subsequent design choices throughout the AI lifecycle. For example, setting relevant ethical controls or objectives. So when it comes to implementing this practice, this is an activity that the system owner leads. In practice, it's very difficult to identify all the concerns in advance, but you can reduce the risk of missing one by drawing on a range of different perspectives, by consulting people such as developers, impacted group representatives, domain experts, or legal experts. Because their findings inform the design choices throughout the AI lifecycle, we suggest this activity happens during the ideate phase when you're conceptualizing the intent of the system. Although, of course, you would revisit as you iterate the system. So some example resources to doing this. In the report, we point to a number of different resources to help elicit impacts. They're mainly group activities designed to bring forward a range of different perspectives and often utilize things like role-playing to cultivate engagement and empathy for the impacted people. So this activity on the left is called Judgment Call. It's actually a role-playing card game where players role-play to argue different stakeholder perspectives around the system, which may help discover impacted groups, stakeholders, or domain experts who may need to be brought in and consulted. On the right, we have an example of a workshop template called Diverse Voices. This is a more comprehensive guide to planning and running an impacted stakeholder consultation. It takes you step by step from organizing the workshop, suggests questions to ask, and documenting your findings. I'll point out Diverse Voices is actually developed for policy use, but both policy and AI systems are about decision processes that impact people. So we still think there's a lot of relevance to AI system operators in this resource. Now, here's another resource that we'll spotlight. This is called the Ethics Canvas, and it's available for download from the web. This is a lightweight workshop template. The way you'd use this tool is you get a group of people together to workshop the system impacts. This could initially be the developers and the business team, but if you identify gaps, then you might bring in domain experts, legal experts, or any other impacted stakeholders that you identify. Basically, these tools are going to be as effective as the expertise and perspectives you can bring into the room. So in this example, we've filled in the canvas around a hypothetical system called Deal Finder. The premise is that this is a system that gives personalized discounts on products in a large retail setting. So this tool prompts us with questions about potential harms and affected individuals, asking things like which individuals and groups are affected, how the system might impact them through incentivizing behaviors or through group dynamics, and what might happen if the product or service fails, or whether the use of resources is sustainable. We then reflect on the most significant ones. We've highlighted a few in yellow here and brainstorm some strategies to control them. For example, we ask, is it possible a marketing system might incentivize unhealthy products? And furthermore, could this effect be concentrated on low-income customers if the deals are personalized? And might the selection of cheap products ingrain product monopolies and lock out small suppliers? So armed with some ideas about elicited impacts, we can take measures such as specifying the right objectives for a successful outcome and restricting what can and can't be promoted. So we can certainly design controls for these harms. Okay, there are many other practices related to well-being, but now we'll hop forward to a fairness example. So the definition of the fairness principle is that AI systems should be inclusive and accessible and should not involve or result in unfair discrimination against individuals, communities, or groups. So we just saw that a system can have positive or negative impacts on people. And when we think about fairness, we need to think about whether there are individuals or groups in the community who are being disproportionately negatively impacted. So that the practices that we selected against these principles are contextualizing fairness to the system's operational use case, defining how to measure fairness using data, and adopting mitigation strategies to improve fairness. So today we'll spotlight on the practice of measuring fairness. So this has an obvious technical component to it, but as we'll show in the coming slides, this practice really needs cooperation between the system owner, who makes key business decisions, and the technical team, who are aiming to quantify and target fairness metrics. So the actions involved in measuring fairness are first to make precise statements about what constitutes fair operation of the system, sufficiently precise that you can then proceed to translate them into measurable quantities. This isn't always possible, as we'll touch on, but if possible, then being able to measure aspects of fairness informs design choices for the AI lifecycle. And many notions of fairness, if they can be measured, they can also be monitored and algorithmically mitigated. So when it comes to implementing fairness measures through the AI lifecycle, there's many points where it comes in. So firstly, when you're specifying the system, that is you're specifying your intent in terms of objectives, measures, and controls, you also need to think about specifying fairness measures. This allows system developers, when they're building the system during the build phase, to implement controls that improve the measures and model the impact of important design choices in terms of both their business metrics and their ethical metrics. When it comes to validating and testing the system can be evaluated against these fairness measures that you've set out, which furthermore means that during the monitoring and review phase, system owners are able to oversee fairness as a facet of system performance, along with all the other aspects that they're responsible for. Before we can measure fairness, we need to articulate how to apply fairness. There's a challenge here because fairness is both contextual, as in it depends on the situation, and value dependent, because it depends on the decision maker too. For example, we have two contrasting policy decisions here. Most people agree that in a drink driving setting, random checks are a fair thing to do. However, when it comes to university entry, most people agree that the process should be selective. What's different here? Well, ATAR is an indicator of likely success in the course of study, but you could argue there are weak signals that might predict drink driving, like the model of the car or the gender of the driver. But using such coarse signals leads to other problems like profiling. And of course, in a university entry setting, there is active debate about to what extent and how we should bring in factors like the applicant's gender or socioeconomic background into the selection process to make the system fair. Now, before we get to measurement, a quick caution that not everything that matters can be measured. So fairness measures are a great way to specify and pursue fairness objectives, but always consider the limitations of your specified metrics and measures. So some pitfalls to be aware of include solutionism, which is assuming the solution is a technical one. Perhaps the problem lies in the kind of interventions the system makes, rather than the algorithm deciding when to intervene. Or formalism, which is a tendency to focus on the measurable aspects of the problem. For example, if you have some data on applicant gender, you might end up focusing on gender fairness, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't care about things you can't measure. Like, what if you're also concerned about fairness with respect to age demographics or ethnicity? And another one is narrow framing, which is not adequately following through the decisions and actions the system makes through to the broader impacts. So it's easy to focus on the direct impacts, but there are often long-term or indirect impacts, such as creating stereotypes or setting up vicious cycles that disadvantaged groups struggle to break out of. And the one we have the picture for here is an issue around poor proxies. So your quantitative measures won't generally perfectly capture your intent. For example, if you were trying to build a measure around healthcare outcomes and you use healthcare costs as a proxy, Unfortunately, healthcare costs conflate health outcomes with access to healthcare. And so these proxies could have blind spots for people who aren't able to afford the healthcare that they need. That said, there are often times when you can define effective fairness measures and then use them throughout the AI lifecycle, as we discussed. So to illustrate some fairness measures, we'll just do a thought experiment here. So this is about fairness in the context of a system that approves home loan applications. So suppose you have an applicant cohort who apply for the home loan. They're these gray people on the screen, and their features are run through a machine learning classifier that basically predicts their ability to repay the loan. So then the only thing that we know at the time we make the decision is how likely the person is to repay the loan according to the model. So a sensible thing to do might be to offer a loan to people where the model predicts they're very likely to repay and reject the applications if it thinks they're unlikely to repay. And so what we're showing here is that the people to the right of the list have got the high scores and they're offered a loan. People to the left have the low scores. But no model is perfect. Every model is going to make some errors. And so what we've shown here is that the people who are green on this list are the ones who can actually service the loan, and the people who are red can't service the loan. So this means that actually there are two types of errors that we might be concerned about in this system. The first one is offering a loan to someone who can't service it, like this red person on the right. And the other one is to not offer the loan to someone who can service it, which denies them an important financial opportunity. So this mostly relates to harmful impacts of the system to individuals. But a fairness concern arises if we also are concerned that applicants in the applicant pool belong to different protected groups defined by attributes such as their age or gender or ethnicity. We tend to call these protected attributes, and we'd be concerned if the system was unfairly concentrating particular types of errors on particular disadvantaged groups. So here are some examples of different stakeholders and their fairness concerns around this system. So these are some different perspectives that we've come up with for this thought experiment. The diversity officer wants a balanced customer base. People who can repay the loan, they expect equal financial opportunities regardless of which demographic group they belong to. And the social responsibility team doesn't want to be systematically setting up any demographic groups for loan defaults. Quantifying these concerns means translating these ideas into measures that you can evaluate from data. And this is where fairness measures come from. So we'll have a go at translating these now. Firstly, for the diversity officer that wants a balanced customer base. So there's two ways you could interpret this, and you would need to clarify with them. They might either mean that the total selection should be equal across groups, reflecting an ideal cohort. For example, 10 from group A and 10 from group B. You can approach that kind of thing with quotas. Or they might mean that the selection rate should be equal across groups, in that you should accept 50% of applicants from group A and 50% of applicants from group B. Now, the next stakeholder says people who can repay want the same financial opportunities regardless of their group. So this is a different cohort now. This is amongst applicants who can service the loan. The fraction that receive the loan should be equal across groups. This is something that we can measure, and it's actually got the name equal opportunity in the literature. The next stakeholder says the social responsibility team doesn't want to systematically set up any groups for loan defaults. So this time, instead of being concerned about people who can repay missing out, we're concerned about people who can't repay getting the loan. So amongst applicants who are selected for a loan, the rate of loan defaults should be equal across groups. So each of these measures is concerned with a different outcome being balanced amongst a different part of the cohort. First one is everyone who applied. The next one is people who can service the loan. And the last one is people who actually receive the loan. So it's important to note that while all these fairness criteria are desirable and valid concerns, they pose what we call competing objectives, as in you can't necessarily improve against one criteria without compromising some of the others, which just means that hard decisions need to be made about how to prioritize them. which at this point, I want to bust the myth that fairness is entirely a technical problem. So suppose we have two systems, like this figure on the left. One system performs better by our equal opportunity measure, which protects people who can repay, while the other system scores better against our equality of default measure, which protects people who can't repay. So which is better, system A or system B? This is not typically a choice you would expect the data scientist to make, but rather a business judgment that should reflect the values of the organization. I'll also point out that unless you create incentive structures in your organization that recognize ethical decision-making, staff cannot justify making ethical concessions against any business objectives. The takeaway here is don't expect your data science team to take care of fairness. You also need the system owners to be involved in the process. They need to be equipped to understand design trade-offs and incentivized to achieve ethical outcomes as well as business outcomes. So when it comes to measuring fairness, there are two types of resources you might need. You might need help to choose which measures to use, and you might need help to evaluate the chosen metrics. To choose appropriate metrics, the types of tools we talk about in the report are a mixture of educational guidelines and procedural tools like decision trees. Here on the top left, we have an example of a metric selection tree from the Aquitus toolkit. This guides the user through a sequence of targeted questions, like whether many or few people receive an intervention, or whether the intervention is assistive or punitive. And you end up at a measure like the ones we're just discussing. This can be really useful to frame your thinking, but keep in mind that the questions in this tree are deeply technical, and the tool can make the decision seem more clear-cut than it really is. So we really recommend applying the process from multiple perspectives from each impacted stakeholder. On the other hand, the conceptual guidelines are more about equipping the people making these decisions with good judgment, because with enough knowledge, you can specify your own appropriate metrics around the contextual concerns, but it takes more time and investment in education and training. And at the point where you've specified your metrics, there are various types of resources available for the development team to evaluate them against data. Amongst the most powerful are freely available open source libraries like AI Fairness 360 or FairLearn. These implement a range of common fairness metrics in the form of Python libraries you can build into your workflow. There are also visual explorers. And of course, if you're in an ecosystem like Amazon SageMaker or Salesforce Einstein, the service providers are increasingly offering their own tools and resources, and we point to a few options there too. So there are increasingly a lot of options to choose from. Now, the next principle is transparency and explainability. So this principle states there should be transparency and responsible disclosure so people can understand when they are being significantly impacted by AI and can find out when an AI system is engaging with them. The practices we've selected are disclosing key information about the system and its operation, documenting key information to enable external scrutiny, and explaining the system at an appropriate level to a range of audiences. Today, we're going to spotlight this second practice around documenting key information. So there are two reasons why you might need transparency. There's the ethical reason, as in you think the stakeholder has a moral right to know. And there's the instrumental reason, as in you think that information is going to help catch errors or identify problems with the system. So when we talk about transparency, we need to think about who the different impacted stakeholders are and what each of them needs to know. So this slide has some example stakeholders and their concerns. For example, people impacted by a decision may need to contest their outcome or adapt their behavior in the future. People designing or responsible for the design of AI systems may be concerned about being able to detect a failure of the system to meet its objectives. An AI-assisted employee who uses AI in their workplace to advise on decisions may need to calibrate their confidence in the system's predictions. And external regulators or researchers need to understand the objectives and assumptions coded in the system and understand its impacts. And the public collectively may want to participate in discourse regarding the impact on society. So when sharing details about the system with these groups, transparency can establish trust, reveal ethical problems, or set appropriate expectations. Additionally, it may be required for compliance, and the process itself motivates ethical decision-making. However, we have to be careful to make sure the disclosure is audience appropriate, Otherwise, it can be used by bad actors to design attacks, can be used by impacted individuals to game the system, or it could be easily misinterpreted or counterproductive for the audience. For example, being too technical and creating consumer fatigue. So the specific practice we're going to spotlight today is documenting key information to enable external scrutiny. This means documenting aspects of the system design and performance to provide relevant information to the impacted stakeholders we're just discussing. So the benefits here are you ensure the impacted stakeholders get the information they need, you open up the system to appropriate scrutiny, and you ensure developers who reuse the data or model in the future understand its limitations. So as you can see, transparency is essential through the whole AI lifecycle. It begins with the system itself being registered, for example, in a registry that could be internal or public facing. As we saw in previous practices, specifying the system involves making ethical decisions, and these can be documented in a system registry during the specification stage. When you're building the system, developers can document key design decisions and justify them in terms of the ethical objectives. At the point where you're ready to deploy the system, you can compile relevant information into a system card or a data sheet, which I'll look at next. And finally, it's critical that this documentation makes it to the intended stakeholders. And distribution is something that the owner can do at the deployment stage. And of course, it needs to be kept up to date as the system evolves. So here's two examples, data sheets for data sets and model cards. So these contain lots of information relevant to AI system creators, but also relevant to other groups such as policymakers or consumers. You can think of these like nutritional fact sheets you get on the side of a cereal box. For documentation creators, the objective is to encourage careful reflection on the process of creating, distributing, and maintaining data sets or models. Whereas for the documentation consumers, the value comes from ensuring they have the information they need to make decisions about like whether a model is fit for purpose or what the limitations of the model are. So both of these can be a really valuable part of the AI lifecycle. So at this point, I'll hand back to Simon to speak on accountability.
Yep. Thanks, Al. Yeah. So I'll just wrap it up with the accountability principle. Yeah, so this kind of speaks to just having clearly identified individuals who are responsible for the various parts of the AI throughout its life cycle and ensuring human oversight throughout. Yeah, so we just kind of like to think of accountability as something you can break down to kind of having three key ingredients, right? One is responsibility with a very clearly defined scope. Another important ingredient is answerability to a forum. So this forum could be like an internal committee, could be a regulator or the public, or it could be like a manager, whatever is kind of appropriate for your organization and the AI system and its use cases. And as part of answerability, like two kind of key components of it are the accountable party needs to have the capacity to be able to answer questions put to them and to be able to justify the decisions that they've made about the system. And also that the forum has the right to be able to ask questions of the accountable party. And then the other last ingredient is sanctionability. So some mechanism for the forum potentially to request, for the forum to kind of penalize the accountable party if necessary. And in an organization, kind of these ingredients are kind of realized by the practices that we identify in the report. And I'll just talk about them briefly now, but it's kind of like defined roles kind of is linked to responsibility. Things like knowledge and tools is all about answerability as well as external audits, independent audits. And then sanctionability could be things like, it could be a mechanism for imposing penalties, or the flip of that is some kind of incentivizing positive behavior as well. So just on the roles, we just spoke about these kind of three key roles that play a pivotal part in deciding, you know, how an AI system operates. These need to kind of evolve slightly when we talk about what their activities are in regards to responsible AI. So I'll just look at like the senior leaders. They're kind of extremely important in this whole thing because they need to invest in responsible AI and kind of signal to the organization that it's a high priority to them, right? So many of the practices that we kind of spoke about require like the development team and the system owner to kind of take time away from their traditional duties of like maximizing profit or accuracy in order to address some concerns that they see in relation to transparency or fairness, for example, right? But without like a clear green light from the senior leaders, then this is they're unlikely to do this. We've seen this before where they're hesitant to kind of do this because it's not they don't think that they have the clearance to do so from up top. So all of these practices start from the top is what I'm trying to say. They can kind of enshrine these practices in something like an AI policy, developing an AI lifecycle, and stating very clearly, here's what we value, here are the principles that we subscribe to in this organization. And then the system owners, not only do they need to care about the business objectives, but now they need to be able to kind of specify what the ethical objectives are for that system and balance them accordingly. And lastly, the dev team need to be in a position where they can expose what these trade-offs are, what the ethical impacts are of the system, and informing the kind of key stakeholders like the system owners so that they can make they have the best available information available to them when they do come to making decisions. And the last part of accountability that I'll just speak to is something that we believe very strongly here. We think that, getting accountability right is like a catalyst for all the other principles, right? So we try to help organizations be accountable by understanding what the risks are in this space. So we focus a lot on education here, and we offer training. We think it's like a foundational skill in this area, and it kind of bootstraps everything else. So like we have a bunch of courses, and because we've said that, responsible AI isn't just a technical problem, we offer these courses across all levels of an organization, from the dev team right up to the senior leaders and board. And they focus on things like, as simple as like what is an AI system, right up to like what risks they create, how you control them, and looking at automated decisions, as well as like, large language models are everywhere now. So we're getting a lot of questions about that, and we offer a course in that area too. Coming back to accountability as well, we also kind of offer independent audits as well to kind of help with answerability here. So we can do like very quick, short engagements with people where we talk to the system owner and kind of come up with, here are some risks we have identified and some potential recommendations. Or we do longer engagements when we look at like what the intent of the system is and kind of follow that the whole way through to like what is the evidence that the system is actually operating in line with those intents. Okay, so just to wrap up, I encourage you to, we didn't get a chance obviously to touch on everything here today, but hopefully you've gotten a flavor for what the content of the report actually is. We encourage you to kind of check it out and see what bits you can adopt within your own organization. Whether you're developing AI or procuring it, if your system is kind of impacting customers, we think that these practices are important. And lastly, I'd just like to say that we'd like to think of this report as like version 1.0. So it's released under a Creative Commons license, and we expect to update the report going forward, which is definitely needed, right? Because, the AI field is evolving very rapidly. Risks change, seems like almost, quite frequently, and so too to the practices, right? So a lot of the content that we put in the report is kind of based on our own experiences and things we've gathered from the literature. But I think now we have a great opportunity to kind of incorporate feedback from Australian businesses who are trying these or have their own kind of solutions that they believe are quite effective. And we can incorporate that feedback back into the next version of this report, and we can develop a product that's, like an even stronger guide, I guess, to help readers on their journey towards responsible development of AI systems. Okay, so thanks very much. I think I'll pass back to Rita now, and I'll stop screen sharing and we open up for questions if there are any. Thank you. You're mute, Rita. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Thank you so much, Simon and Alistair. It was an amazing talk, and I really loved all the examples you gave, etc. And we do have some questions coming through, and I'm going to ask the first one, and it's from Tira from Ramdas. In practice, how easy is it to implement these controls?
Yeah, so there's definitely a spectrum there in what we presented. Some I think are pretty lightweight. Like we try to kind of consider when we're recommending these that, some organizations are just quite small, right? They might have one or two people working in the AI versus other organizations which are a lot larger. So we try to target resources depending on the org. One that Alistair highlighted there, which was on the ethics canvas, is really lightweight, right? And I think that's a very effective thing to do just at the very start when you're kind of heading off and developing or procuring an AI system, just to sit down and just write out what you think the harms are with the system, who might be impacted by it, And that really helps kind of frame in your mind what you need to consider going forward, right? So like once you've kind of have them pinned up and say, here's what we think is important, you know, all of your decisions that you make after that point should be in the context of what you've identified early on. And that should be kind of considered like a living document too, I think. That gets updated as you learn new things, right? But yeah, that's a very lightweight one, and that's very easy to implement. There are lots of great guides out there too, in terms of like the fairness stuff that I was talking about. Some of these measures are very easy to do. Some of them are quite hard to measure in practice. Like there's things like, how do you know about a customer that missed out on an opportunity? It can be quite hard to find, right? And you have to kind of balance the effort that is going to find out like that information versus the harm that you could be creating. So there's decisions to be made, but I'm hoping that there's something there for everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. And do you find talking to your technology providers could be also an excellent way of being able to practice responsible AI?
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah, just to follow up on that, like consumers of people who are procuring AI are in a great position to demand better transparency and from the providers, right? So if you're asking for these kind of things to be reported and made transparent to you, like that puts pressure on them to do it, right? If no one's asking for it, like they're not going to go ahead and do this. So I think you need to push back because you're the ones ultimately taking responsibility for deploying the system. You know, it's important that you do your due diligence and push back on the providers to make it aware to you, like what the system was trained on, what the data looks like, where the failure modes are and things of this, right? So yeah, that's a call out, I guess, I give there.
Okay, so we've got some feedback from Ben at Think Labs, who's really enjoyed the talk. And his concern is around some of the offshore foundation models like Bard, ChatGPT, etc. And he wants to understand more about the impact of using these offshore large language models and that ability to provide responsible AI in Australia.
Yeah, good question. I'll bring Al in here as well. Sorry, I don't want to be hogging the mic completely. I'll just bring him on. But yeah, like a lot of the, I think, yeah, there aren't many onshore large language models, I think, unless you're hosting one yourself. Like I'll say OpenAI is all offshore. But regardless, it's worth, like these language models will have like system cards often associated with them that they'll kind of explain what they go through to try and be transparent about what data they've used to train observed biases and things of this are. But yeah, if you're deciding to use the models yourself, it's important that you make yourself aware of where the shortcomings are in deciding that case.
Yeah, and the main concern about these models being hosted overseas is the privacy and security aspect. As in, like, there are some use cases where you're restricted on being able to send data overseas. So in those instances, as Simon said, it is possible to deploy your own large language models. These things are very compute intensive though. We actually do a whole different course on like the specific risks and controls for large language models, but yeah, they're compute intensive, and that's one of the main reasons that they're often currently deployed overseas, simply because that's where the large computing resources reside.
But yeah, obviously, sorry, be very careful about, check what the provisions are around the data that you hold, right? Like if the data is sensitive in any nature and you're transferring that overseas, like there's probably like legal obligations that prevent you from doing that. So that's very important.
Thank you, Simon and Alistair. I've got another one also from Taraf. How can we identify orgs which may struggle to implement these controls? Are there some architectural patterns, such as data lakes or lake houses, that enable to collect everything consented and figure it out later? Strategies would tend to be more problematic from a data governance perspective, and will these tend to foreshadow likely AI ethical problems? It's a big, complex question around data.
Yeah, like when we're looking at so when we're talking about assessing the impacts of a system, I think it's important, like when we talk about like contextualizing things for the system, it's important to look at like the data is one thing, right? But data being used in different systems has different impacts. Okay, so data, you can't really like certify a data set as being like ethical or in all senses, right? Like if there's a medical data set that's designed for one thing and you use it for something else, right, then that's going to be a problem regardless of what kind of certification that medical data set has on it. So rather than focusing on the data in isolation and then assuming that anything built on top of that is okay, I think we need to look at the impacts on a system level rather than just the data.
Yeah,
Okay.
and to add to that, you want your approach to scale to risk. Like there is obviously a concern that you don't want this process to be onerous, but it's not the case that you apply all controls to all systems, but rather that if you look at an AI system you're thinking about deploying and you want to decide what ethical controls that system needs, you target controls to specific ethical risks by doing stuff like the impact elicitation and impact assessment to decide what is important for each use case. Because using the same data for different systems, you may encounter different risks. Like, for example, if you were using in-store cameras to count footfall in your store versus detect shoplifting, those are very different systems of very different ethical implications. So you wouldn't say that your store's video data is safe for all users. You would have to assess the potential systems you're going to build on top of that data.
Would you look at any ISO standards for that kind of assessment?
Yeah, there are some in the works. I think maybe SC42. Yeah, there's a couple in the works. I think I can't list the names off the top of my head, but yeah, there are. Maybe Alex can check it out there for me. But yeah, there are a number that are certainly worth investing in. I think we might even cite them in the report.
Perfect. All right, and I've got one final question before we close, and it's around: are you seeing the majority of people seeking the guidance from the technical community, or is it the business community, business leaders also well represented?
The start of that was who's pushing.
So are you seeing not just technical people asking for guidance around implementing Australia's AI ethics principles? Are you also seeing business leaders asking for guidance?
Yeah, like it varies. Certainly, like we've seen, like oftentimes the tech team are very much aware of it, like of the problems that they're doing. And personally, my own background, like the reason I got into this area was because I was in a tech team where we were developing systems, but felt like I was making decisions about the system that I knew would have some impact on the line, but I had no visibility as to what that impact was, but it was still up to me to make those decisions. I didn't like that. And we're seeing that a lot in groups we work with, where the tech team's going to know that, depending on what they set this number to, it's going to have a different impact down the line. But then there's often a block when they meet like the next level up, who's like the business owner or something like that, and they're more interested they're not as much aware of the consequences, the decisions that have been made kind of within the tech team and its impacts. So I think it is improving though. Like we are seeing now as, things like the hype around, say, large language models, if it's done anything, it's kind of shone a light on the need to be aware of the risks, I think, so to a more general audience. So we are kind of we're getting a lot more questions from less technical people about what risks are they taking on when they adopt an AI system, which is a good thing, I think, right? That it's kind of awareness has been raised. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Simon. I'd like to thank you both for a fantastic session. We've got a heap more questions. We'll figure out how to answer them later. But thank you so much. And please, all the listeners, please fill out our survey and let us know what you think. Your feedback is super important to us. And we look forward to following up with the recording and other answers to the questions. And thank you so much for everyone for attending today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
So long.